trabajando, tío, llevamos una estamos ahí trabajando, estamos concreto y la verdad es un tío muy bueno, muy motivado y que tiene experiencia. Además, no solo versiones, estamos componiendo también a buen ritmo además.
Y cuando la realización te explicamos lo que es cámara que vamos, quizás tenga menos cositas que sobre todo si la cámara se quita de su función habitual, luego cuando viene se echa una técnica o así. Entonces sí lo que yo pongo modo manual y puedes cambiar hasta 100 parámetros, de los cuales yo solamente cambio la ganancia, ¿sabes? Porque a veces varía la luz y le da un poquito más.
No, pero el suyo se oye solo para el vídeo, ¿no? Que no es que se oye en la sala. Vale, vale. Vale, era para decirle una cosa o la otra. Sí,
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Violeta and Carlos, for keeping organizing these very interesting seminars. I'm Elisa Otero Rozas. I'm also recently engaged in the Estación Biológica. I'm a Ramón y Cajal researcher, and I have the pleasure today to introduce Camila Benavides. She's doing a short stay here with us at EBD. She works in ethnobiology also. She's from Bolivia, and she just filled in her PhD, so she'll be defending very soon and becoming also a PhD. And I thought it was interesting to share her work here because it's at this interface between social and ecological sciences. So it's one of the social ecological approaches, particularly in agroecology. And I think, as far as I know, some of the research lines here at the house might also have some relationship with what she does. So, and she's willing to collaborate further with people at EBD, and in the future I'm looking for postdocs. So also very much welcome to engage with her later if you find these research lines interesting. So thanks, Camila. The floor is yours. You've got the mic, right? So I can turn this off.
So thank you for having me this afternoon. I never thought I was going to live in Europe, and I never thought I was going to live in Spain, more of all the countries. I never imagined being in such a hot place because I come from the mountains in Bolivia, so very fresh mountains with a lot of air. And here I feel sometimes very overwhelmed by the heat, but I am learning to like being in flip-flops all my life. So as I said, I come from the mountains, but I had the luck also to live in hot places for some periods of my life because I mainly have worked in the lowlands of my country, Bolivia. So in that context, I found a job that allowed me to do a PhD in the second work package of a project that was called Biocultural Diversity in the Farming Landscapes of the Global South, which was mainly focused on my country. And my thesis ended up being called this way, so Food Comes from Agroecosystems, the role of agriculture for the reproduction of life. It's a very broad title, but maybe you will understand why I put this title in later on in the presentation. I had the luck to study, as Elisa said, in a very interdisciplinary institute in Germany, so the Social Ecological Systems Institute in northern Germany. So now I am basically practicing for my PhD presentation, which is on October 14th, and I plan to present you all of these steps that led me to finish my thesis. So I think, first of all, I would like to start by highlighting that we are always in contact with nature. Human and nature are highly intervened, and thus this is necessary. Our encounters are necessary to be recognized for sustainability outcomes. Ecological relations, so what ecologists do and study, so these encounters are allowed, and so life, what I call in my thesis, life reproduction. So an interesting ecosystem where to study these encounters are agroecosystems, because agroecosystems not only cover 44% of the earth, but they are the places of complex encounters that go beyond the field crop. Normally, when we think about agroecosystems, we focus on observing how the crops are producing, which plagues are attacking them, because we are focusing on what we are sowing. But in fact, people hold relationships with beings beyond these limits, and in that the more dense vegetation cover that we observe behind that woman. So I think it's relevant to study the current nexus between human and nature in agroecosystems, including those elements that are beyond the crop field. Why? Because I think food is found beyond those limits, and food could be used as a bridge to understand our nexus between these very influential species that we are in the ecosystems and the other less observed or less highlighted species in the agroecosystems particularly. We all eat, and many eat from the agroecosystems too, many other species. I am not talking only about humans. What I try to do in my thesis is not to just put the highlight in agroecosystems to humans, but to think about the food of both living beings, whichever they are, no? So humans and the other living beings that are there. We all feed from there. Some of other living beings will certainly feed on more conserved spaces, but they are still using these kind of spaces to make their living. So I think it was important to use food as the bridge of our relationships and to see what was going on in agroecosystems. But which characteristics to study about these human-nature relationships in changing agroecosystems, because agriculture is not something static that is just there. People preserve, people don't preserve, people are in agroindustry or not. Agriculture is constantly changing. But to choose what to study, one could study crops, one could study firewoods, fruits, introduced species, water, many other relationships, but I decided to focus on a relevant animal and the crops, because although I am saying I don't want to focus on the crops, they are basically what is the main aspect of an agroecosystem. So, but before doing this, we thought in the team that it was pertinent to spend some time in the communities that we wanted to work with, after talking with local institutions, to spend some locally, to identify some locally grounded relevant studies, the relevant study cases that we could use. So we went to the field for 3 months on 2021, and we just went to observe, to cook, and to walk, so basically to do ethnographic work. It was my first ethnographic work in my life. For me, it was too unstructured because I came from an ecological background, but honestly, this opened my mind, and now I think I like ethnography more than ecology, but well. So we ended up observing that, in the pictures, I think it's visible, honey came many times in our observations. People often talked about bees. They often talked about how they enjoyed sharing juice with honey, and they even did festivals about that. And so we saw all of that, and we thought, okay, so bees are key. And also hunted species, mammal hunted species, were keys at the same level of importance. But honestly, if I should be honest, we chose bees because hunting relationships are very male-dominated, and I wanted to get away from that. So we picked up these more docile and more women species, although women, we are not necessarily docile. But at the end of this period, we had 2 empirical questions that I wanted to answer, first with my PhD, which was what happens when we include information about bees and honey, so traditional ecological knowledge, into farmer characterizations. And second, well, this was to describe humans looking at foods and relationships between the field crop, as I said in the beginning. And second, I wanted to take the perspective of the bees and think which foods were available for these bees and which were actually being used by them in these changing agricultural systems. But you have to have a framework. From where are you going to, which perspective are you going to have? And so it comes a more boring part where I started to think, okay, I studied agroecology. And agroecology has these ecological, economical, and social aspects that it says it should be balanced for sustainable outcomes. And at the same time, it often came this more of a buzzword, I would say, talking about food sovereignty. And when I started to read more about food sovereignty, I saw that it was a concept related to rights, that it came from bottom-up organizations, so from peasant organizations from the Global South, and that it also put a highlight into ecological and sustainable methods for achieving this right to food that humans should have. So I asked myself, how intervened are these two concepts, and how ecology is integrated in this very interesting and contestatory concept. So both were systemic, recognized the interwoven nature of humans and nature. And so I had a theoretical question. To what extent does empirical academic literature on food sovereignty incorporate this agroecological perspective, so this balance between ecology and social sciences, and what implications does this have for food-nature discussions? And overall, my thesis has three chapters, 2 empirical and 1 that is theoretical, and where I assess the household characteristics by integrating traditional ecological knowledge information, and a second chapter that is about collecting information about what are actually the foods of bees through the lenses of agroecology and food sovereignty. And third, I have a review of literature where I see these ecological or agroecological perspectives in a political food paradigm. This is the nice part, going to the field. So we went, as you can see, we worked in dry forests of Bolivia, in deciduous forests. And this is a very contrasting place because you can find these two sides of the coin, if you want, of agriculture. In fact, in Bolivia, and particularly in this region that we worked at, the dynamics of land use have been changing rapidly. And as you can observe, the forest loss has increased very, very much in these last decades. And as always, we always put these agriculture land use shifts, but inside this category, there can be many things that are happening. No? So it's not one type of agriculture, but it seems that it's a great factor changing or affecting the cover loss in the forest of this place. So as you can see, we see these very contrasting communities where one is totally immersed in the agro-industrial region and one that is at the frontier. It is predicted that this zone will be immersed in the agro-industry in the next 5 to 10 years. And so we were interested in seeing the differences that were happening inside this place. And we started with our first question, so characterizing smallholders by using this traditional ecological knowledge, and we sampled 1/3 of the population. We assessed productive, market, and assets characteristics, and seeing mainly these variables to understand human crop-related aspects. These are also part of this set of variables. So the use of preserved seeds, pesticides, traditional variables that are used in agronomic studies. But the second set of variables were this traditional ecological knowledge about bees, where we tried to ask people what they knew about the bees' foods, about the bees' nest, of the relationships of bees and crops, of the relationships of bees and forests, and of a cultural aspect that I wanted to explore, so what they knew about stories of their encounters in a more qualitative way. Well, we have many qualitative questions that were transformed into range, but this was particularly a qualitative question. To go beyond the field. These were also traditional ecological knowledge variables. So if they harvest honey in the forest, if they knew or practiced bee conservation strategies, and the number of plants they harvested in the forest, just to see this relationship of going foraging for more than one resource. And for my second question, so about the bees' food, we had 20 beehives that were marked in both communities, as you can see, and we sampled around the beehives the vegetation that was surrounding the nests for 3 bee species, but we focused on my thesis just on Tetragonisca fiebrigi, a very common stingless bees. And we had on each hive that we marked, we sampled, as I said, vegetation in transects, and we assessed richness, evenness, life forms, habitats, about the plants, and we also captured bees to assess pollen composition. So these are just illustrative pictures of what we did in the field. So to understand which foods were available for bees, we collected plants in orthogonal transects. And to assess what bees actually ate, we collected pollen from the little bees. So we sometimes waited for the bees for long times because it's very difficult to catch them and to just brush their legs without killing them. And for my third question, what I did was sitting in my desk through all COVID. So this was the first paper I wrote, in fact, and I just read how the articles engaged with this more agroecological or ecological part of this theoretical framework. So I assessed if the engagement was low, so if they just talked about their crops, or if they talked in a more systemic manner about the agroecosystems. The topics, well, just practicing organic agriculture, or the use of forest, integrating this food, the use of forest resources, and the field from where these articles came from. So if they were from natural sciences, or if they were from the social sciences, to see or explore these imbalances that I had hypothesized that existed. And these are the articles that are the result of. This is the article about traditional ecological knowledge. So I did characterizations, typologies of farmers with my colleagues from, well, we are an anthropologist, an agroecologist, another ecologist, and we have interesting results, rather interesting and sometimes unexpected results, I would say. When we only used the traditionally used agronomic variables, which are more about assets and productive crops aspects, we observed that the world was divided mainly along the first axis. And so if we could resume what I observed, it was that there were farmers that had more traditional subsistence livelihoods, which were mainly here. Others that had more inputs and market-oriented livelihoods, which were down there, and many of them that worked outside and had no land. So basically, the analysis had a gradient among these 3 groups, but this one was more of a separated group from the others. And the second approach, when you throw in, so you add these traditional ecological knowledge variables, didn't change much as I expected the structure of the axis. So the same variables, traditional variables, were found across the same places in the axis, but what changed was, for me in general, what I observed is that traditional ecological knowledge was mainly related to traditional and subsistence agricultural strategies. Maybe nothing new. You expect that people that use more traditional ways of cropping will have higher traditional ecological knowledge because they might use more of the land. But something interesting that we found is that even people that had no land or worked outside the communities had similar levels of food and nest descriptions. So they were able to describe what bees needed in order to survive, and they found that very relevant internarratives which I didn't include it in my PhD, but we are currently writing something with my colleague, which is an anthropologist, and that the inputs and market-oriented also stayed in the same place in the ordination. And these variables were very similar across all groups, so all of them could identify what were the necessary foods for bees and the nest in their descriptions. And we observed that, contrary to this perspective, the groups overlapped more in this ordination. So meaning that they shared more characteristics when we added these variables. For me, what it means, this article, what it traces is that it seems that less agricultural related variables will result in more traditional ecological knowledge. But that some aspects of this traditional ecological knowledge can be shared across farmers, which is something that I didn't expect. And as I was saying, well, it's expected that more contact with the land will end, therefore explaining why you might hold more traditional ecological knowledge. And this we linked it to access to land, because people that had no access to land, well, they had knowledge about food and nesting characteristics of bees, but they're very low. So it might be that they are losing contact and thus losing the knowledge that they previously might have held about that. And that the fact that some TECA seem to be similar across households, I found some literature that was saying that despite agroindustry and despite migration, many indigenous people still rely on the resources that you recall from when you were in your territory. Even in my case, sometimes I crave for these kind of things that I will find nowhere except in my country or in my city. And I am a city indigenous person. But of course, it becomes more and more threatened as time passes and deforestation advances. This aspect can also lead to, okay, you still crave for your locally traditional products and you live in the city and you still look for them, but this can put even more pressure in the ecosystems, because it means that you will still look for them and this will shift your needs to another territory. So it's nice that people can still conserve their traditional ecological knowledge and thus still look for forest resources, but we have to take it with caution and discuss what this can mean for other forests which can be threatened by overexploitation. So, but it's nice to say, and it's important to say, that with this kind of analysis, by integrating traditional ecological knowledge into the characterization and typologies of farmers, which are often very simple, by complexifying them, we can highlight that there are local tacit knowledge that emerges and that could be used, for instance, in communities that are very eroded in their biodiversity, such as the one that is in the agroindustrial region. So there is a balance between being careful and seeing the emergence of hope in these territories, which is something we didn't expect. So I think that's the relevance of that first article. And so I already explored something about humans and the relationship with nature, but what was going on with bees in these territories. So this is the third chapter of my thesis. That it was very nice to collaborate with all of these ecologists that sit down with me and that are also doing their PhDs in most of the cases. And we saw first, as I told you before, what were the foods that were available for bees. So very simple graphs. We assess the richness of species at the genus level, because we couldn't go further. And we see that there are no differences between the agroindustrial community and the traditional community that is at the frontier of the agroindustrial zone. Yes, there are similar number of plants between contrasting settings, but when you go and look at the percentage of different plant life forms in the landscapes, we see that in the traditional agroecosystems there were more trees compared to the agroindustrial community where herbs were more prevalent. There are no significant differences, but still we find visually or in counts we observe the differences between these settings. Composition changes, so there are more trees and there are more herbs. And so deforestation might affect the composition, which would be hidden if we only have made a diversity analysis or richness analysis as we did before. So the foraging behavior of bees, which leads me to which were the bees' foods of the little So we see that at the agroindustrial setting, there were more, the bees visited a wider range of species of plants, well, of genus of plants. So what this could mean is that bees might have to compensate for the potentially low quality of resources that are found in this place by looking for more types of plants. It has been proven that woody vegetation has more protein content than earth vegetation. So that might explain what we observe despite the non-significant analysis. And when we go and look at the percentage of different life forms found in the diets, we also observe something interesting. At the agroindustrial setting, the most important items in the pollen or in the legs that we found of the bees, we observed that trees and herbs were the most consumed items. And in the traditional setting, 60% of the plants that were visited were trees. So trees are important in both settings and with a significant test. So trees are important regardless of the setting that you looked at, and this might be explained by the potential, which we would like to measure in the future, the density per area that you find in trees. Contrary to what you find in herb strips, you find your herb strip, but in a tree you can find a higher density potentially of flowers that you would find in herbs. This plus the aspect that nutrient content might be higher. So trees are important, basically. And other variables might explain what we observed, like competition, which we didn't assess, but we should do it in the future. So we explored both the side of the person and the side of the bees and their relations to foods. In this case, the food item is honey and pollen that comes from the vegetation. But what was going on in this more theoretical part? How balanced were their research in social ecological topics, or more precisely in agroecological topics? So we published this article here with the collaboration also of Elisa, and we published this paper in Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. And you can see, first, we measured the level of engagement of the papers, right? So we saw that agroecological topics were central. This is very interesting. 48% of the papers raised this aspect of food sovereignty, so the agroecological part, as central of the papers. This means that they provide a great importance to this axis, but when you go and see the topics of the articles, you separate them into two and uses of resources, and then ecological conditions. In the ecological conditions, we found the lower frequency of articles that mention, for instance, natural processes such as pollination, seed dispersion, or any other aspect about ecosystems. But they focus mainly on describing agricultural practices that are good for the ecosystem. So, I don't know, like doing the tillage or renewing organic matter in the households, these were the most frequent aspects. And interestingly, the traditional ecological knowledge was raised also as a very central topic, with descriptions that went beyond the quantitative, going to qualitative very often. So it was very rich in raising the importance of local knowledge for achieving food sovereignty and for agroecology. So first of all, the imbalance of topics that we see in literature does not need to mean that these topics are wrong. Social aspects, of course, are important in a food sovereignty paradigm, because this is the basis of this topic, no? Like protesting against the system that is making agriculture go in just one direction. So it was natural that these aspects were more raised. But natural processes are also important for social ecological sustainability, and they are all in almost all the papers. I found them at least as buzzwords, and in 48% they were central in their justification for their analysis. So it's important to include them empirically, no? So where is this more contestatory view of the agroecosystems? Where is this rights discussion about agroecosystems too, no? And about the natural processes that are necessary to achieve food, and to achieve food not only for us, but also for other species, such as in this case bees. I go back a little bit to my empirical part. So we have an interest, agroecologists, to engage with political concepts that are born from grassroots movements, because at the end we work for farmers. So overall, I think my thesis highlights that semi-natural vegetation seems to be important for both humans and bees, so for the permanence of traditional ecological knowledge, and also as foods for species such as bees, and that we need balanced social ecological studies. I think we need to jump in and to say, okay, we cannot all be sociologists and we cannot all be ecologists, but it's important to go to your colleague that is sociologist and tell him, okay, I need to collaborate with you. And it's important that sociologists do the other way around too, I think. So this should be the end. But I wanted to highlight this work that we did in our project, which was going beyond academia. For me, it's a very exciting and enriching part of doing research, how you transfer knowledge. So we did it in many ways, but I think a central point of the people that hold the knowledge on the farmers. So we did books where these people told their stories based on our surveys, and we went and spent some time with them and to reflect their knowledge in a very nice book that I can share with you, that is written not only in Spanish but in the local languages of people. We work with radio stations and doing photo stories. We did yet another one of podcasts, but which was very relevant for people because they could hear themselves in the radio and whenever they wanted, beyond just listening Radio Santa Cruz at 11 a.m. They could go to their phones and listen when they wanted what they were saying. And we tried to do alternative practices with them because I think something has changed in research since I began my studies in 2011, well, my thesis of bachelor in 2011, is that before people were very received what you brought, like, okay, we will do a management plan of this hunted species, tata. We did it, ciao. But this time people were saying like, okay, you are coming to our territories, what are you going to leave? We need to shift our practices, we don't have water, so what do we do? So we started to do practices, actually doing pilots about how could we change these practices with agronomists, ecologists, and people from the communities. And I think those results were also very interesting because people are very motivated to shift their ways. And we did murals, of course, to put this more artistic part that is silent but transmits information about the results that we obtained in the communities. If you want to know more, you can go and visit the website of our project, which has a lot of information, not only from me, but of our team, of all our team. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Camila, for this talk. There is time now for questions. If you, okay.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I had a question about your first empirical study, and I heard you talking alternatively about people and households, and I wasn't sure what the unit of survey was.
The unit of survey were the household level.
Okay, so if anybody in the household had knowledge about the bees, then it was a yes. Oh.
Yes.
Thank you.
And they could intervene. No, I know this, and yeah.
So you interviewed the whole household together?
Yes, when they were present, yes, and when there was just someone there, well, they responded for the whole household. We told them, you need to think about what your father does. You need to think about what your daughter does. And so, oh, yes, we have this. They answer for all the house.
Is there any, I mean, I don't know, but if there is any, if having everybody together could introduce any bias from some categories of people being less comfortable speaking or intervening? Or is that in this situation not an issue?
I was asking myself the same thing because I think the main bias could be that we are not using explanatory factors that are often very important to explain patterns, which are age, which are the gender, which is level of education, which couldn't be, you can't know. We had a person from 90 years, another from 17, so that could be the main bias, I think. And it has been criticized in the revisions of this paper, actually.
Okay, thank you. Before Rafa's question, I think that we have one question online. Carlos? No? Sorry, I misunderstood. So, yes.
Thank you, Camila. I have two questions, if I may. The first one is related to the previous one. It's very nice that you found that farmers not owning land still retain the knowledge, but I was wondering about the ages of these informants. But you mentioned that you don't have direct access because the unit is not the individual, but the family, right?
Yes, but since I took a look so many times to this data set, I could answer about the ages of the people of these households. In general, people that were living in the households that had no land were in general lonely people. Many times.
Lonely.
They were people that either lost their family because they were old, very old, and they used to live in another community, but now they came here and they are just there without land, waiting for some land to be available so that they can crop and eat something. Or they were newly established settlers. So they were, because Guarani, this is important also, I think, to contextualize. I studied Guarani people and Chiquitano people. And the Guarani are very migrant settlers. So they are always moving, and they, in particularly these people from the agro-industrial place, are often traveling between the Chaco region and the Chiquitania region. So they hold sometimes territory outside of this agro-industrial place, but they want to integrate to the agro-industry and sometimes have no land. So maybe also that is why these connections and this knowledge about bees in this particular place didn't exist. It's way more complicated their case than the other one, which are living there since 200, 300 years.
Okay, I'm just asking because it will be very interesting to see whether this knowledge is being retained in younger generations, or it's just simply the old farmers that don't own land because they lost everything and moved to the new settlement. They still retain this knowledge. The situation will be different. And the second question was related to this nice result about bees in traditional communities visiting more trees species. And because I wonder in this traditional environment there will be more trees compared to the other. So I was wondering if this difference is simply an effect of the vegetation. If there are more trees, by mere chance, I will expect the bees to visit more trees. And it will be very straightforward because you have vegetation surveys to conduct a chi-square test or something similar just to see if they are visiting more trees than expected given the background vegetation in either community. Does it make sense to you?
It makes sense to me, and I will talk to you later.
Okay.
Because I think it's important and relevant to explore that, especially for discussing this in my defense. But I think it might be also the effect of the sampling. We already talked about that with you, and you asked me about how I was planning to sample in the future. And I told you that I didn't sample 3 hives in the forest, 3 hives in the crops, 3 hives in the fallows. I have mainly I only have 1 hive in the forest, in fact. So the rest in fact, I need to change this because these are fallows mixed with crops in this community. So it might be the effect of the fallows. The fallows might not have such a richness of trees that one would expect in this community, right? So I guess that if in the future I put more beehives that are placed in the forest, maybe that will actually raise the number of species that are found in these places. I think that could be something. This place is somehow managed at some point, and here no, and maybe this affects the richness of species that one can find.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do we have more questions?
Well, thank you. It was a super interesting talk. And I was curious on since it's a very anthropological focus with a study, my impression is that the knowledge about the land they own or the land they live with actually fights back or kind of makes them hesitant to further progress in the industrialization of the place they live. But are they actually, the families, are they actually aware of the risks, or they are just aware but they need to improve their living, so they actually further help the industrialization? It's like a more anthropological question, but like it's very interesting to know.
Yes, it's a very relevant question. I think there is a risk of romanticizing what's happening and to say, these indigenous people are conserving the knowledge, as we often think. I think it's more a necessity than a very thought thing to preserve these practices related to honey. And this knowledge, the knowledge I don't know. The knowledge might be just because of the encounters, no? But the practices are, for me, more a necessity because these people are looking for alternative ways to survive, basically. They are very impoverished by the agroindustry. The agroindustry was not consulted at all. It was just dictated that it should change because these people, of the agroindustrial place, at least, they arrived not long ago, as I said. They are migrants, and so they moved there in the 80s, and they told us that they liked to live as they lived in the Chaco, where is that they harvest from the forest and that they crop a little bit of maize, and they eat often maize with honey dishes. But since they established in the agroindustrial core, which they didn't knew, they just came, the people of the government, with the packages. Okay, you need to clear this, and so they did it. But they are still, I don't know if they are unable to integrate agroindustry because they don't have the money to crop with pesticides and with whatever they need, because they don't have the income. So they are still looking for food somehow. They even go beyond their territory, and there are territorial problems with this community because it's a very small community of almost 3,000 hectares. But they go beyond, and they go to the other forest patches that are not theirs, and they forage there because they need. So I think there's a risk of romanticizing, but there is a necessity to say also that, hey, this knowledge still prevails somehow. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Camila. Super interesting. And following up on this issue that Camila was saying about romanticization of traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous relationships with nature, I think there is being a shift also in that regard. No, so in the last years there is this researcher Vicky Reyes, no, from ICTA in Barcelona, who has had to large scale ERCs, and one of the things that she's finding, and also here, as for instance with livestock farmers, transhuman livestock farmers, is that traditional ecological knowledge is not so much related frequently with age, for instance, no, as it has been traditionally proven, but more with practices and with relationships. Relationships both within households and between households, and also with nature, no, whatever it is. So, for instance, in the case of transhuman shepherds, we have found that the best predictor, or the most influential variable in their traditional ecological knowledge, was whether they were actually doing transhumance on food, and they had other families, a relationship with other families that were transhuman, and that was way more explanatory than age, for instance. And this is similar results are being found because this is being more explored. While traditional ethno-ecological studies made more focus on the typical the influence of age, gender, origin, and these more sociological variables. So this is related also with this relational turn that we are seeing, that is being also reflected in the EBES and so on, to pay more attention to the relational aspects and dimensions and values to better understand why people make decisions as they do, and so on. So yeah, it's a.
So the knowledge should be a matter of promoting connections between people
Exactly.
rather than.
Exactly. Between people and of people with nature. So the more the closer relationship you keep with nature, let it be bees, let it be livestock, let it be the forest, the more likely you are to preserve the knowledge.
There's a comment online thanking you for the lecture.
Okay, great.
From Nicole.
Okay, have more questions. Let's please thank Camila again.